War in the Darkness, recorded testimony of Staff Sergeant Elias Merck, 19th Shadow Battalion Planet Designation, NOX-47 Unofficial. Local Condition, Permanent Night. Prologue. If you're hearing this. If you're hearing my voice, it means somebody finally opened the crate marked Do Not Play. It means the quarantine seal failed, or someone broke it on purpose. It means the dark got out, or you went in to meet it. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking to be believed. I'm asking you to listen from the first breath to the last, because the only weapon we ever had on NOX-47 was attention. And attention is exactly what the thing in the dark eats. So don't pause, don't look away, don't turn on a lamp and think you're safe. On NOX-47, light doesn't reveal the truth, light erases it. And the truth still kills you. They told us it was a resource war, a shadow conflict, tucked behind treaties and denials. They told us the planet had no sunrise because its star was too distant and the orbit was strange. They told us our job was simple: hold the mining corridor, defend the relay, break the insurgent supply line, and go home with a pension that would buy daylight on any world we wanted. They never told us the planet was engineered to be dark. They never told us what the night vision goggles would show. They never told us what would happen if we tried to fight with ordinary eyes. I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you why we learned to fire rifles with our visors down and our lenses taped. Why we walked by temperature and by the sound of a man being opened like a bag. Why our medics stopped carrying flashlights. Why our snipers began to miss on purpose. Why the last order I gave was lights out, all of them, even the ones in your head. Chapter 1. The Night That Never Moved. NOX-47 didn't look like a planet from orbit. It looked like a bruise. A dark sphere with a thin line of blue around its edge, air holding on by sheer stubbornness, and one pale smear of cloud that never changed shape, because the wind didn't dare to blow too hard in the cold. The drop shuttle shuddered as it cut through the upper haze. The cabin lights were red to preserve night adaptation. It was a joke. There was no night adaptation here. There was only night. Across from me, Private Danner played with the strap on his helmet, fingers chewing the fabric. He was 19 and still had the habit of smiling when he was scared, as if grinning could trick the universe into being kind. "Sergeant," he said, voice too loud in the cramped cabin, "is it true the other side eats their dead?" "Keep your mouth shut," I told him. "You'll be hungry enough to understand anything." The others didn't laugh, not because they were humorless, because the sound of laughter in a drop cabin feels like tempting fate. Our lieutenant, Yara Chin, stood with knees bent, hands on the overhead bar, eyes on the little screen that showed the ground rushing up as a featureless black. The display was in false color, the planet's surface as a cold violet sheet, scattered with tiny warm freckles that were equipment, engines, bodies. "There," she said, pointing, "Black Line Corridor, mining rigs at Grid 7, Outpost Black 7 was located here." She didn't say why her voice caught on was. "We all knew, because we'd read the courier packet stamped above your clearance, and then stamped again with the kind of red that meant someone was nervous." Outpost Black 7 had stopped responding. That happens in a war. Radios break, relays freeze, power cells die. But the packet had a note from someone higher up, someone whose name came with a digital signature that made your stomach tighten. "Do not initiate white light. NV use restricted to short SCANS only. Thermal priority. Noise discipline AT all times. If contact, do not pursue visual confirmation." In other words, you can't look for what's killing you. We landed hard. The ramp slammed down into darkness so thick it felt like a physical surface. Cold air flooded in, cutting through the stale metal smell of the cabin. It tasted like iron and old stone. Outside, our boots hit regolith like brittle ash. There was no horizon, no sky in the way we expected, Above us, a spill of stars, too many, too sharp, hung in a blackness that didn't soften them. No moon, no glow, no smear of dawn. Just a sky full of knives. Goggles, Chin ordered. We flipped our night vision down. The world sprang into sickly green, grainy, crawling, alive with static. And for a second I thought, this is normal. This is what war looks like in the dark. You see your squad as pale ghosts. You see the ground as a textured field. You see the outpost ahead as a jagged shape. Then the goggles found their calibration, and the static thinned. And on the ridge to our left, something moved that wasn't any human silhouette. It was tall, too tall, leaning forward like it had been folded wrong. Its limbs were thin as scaffolding. Its head was a smooth, featureless oval, but the goggles insisted on drawing edges where there should be none. It shimmered with a faint halo like heat haze. I froze. I saw 3 more behind it. 5. A dozen, drifting between the boulders like they were underwater. I lifted my rifle, sight aligned on the tallest one. "Contact," Danner whispered. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat had closed. Lieutenant Chin snapped her fingers in front of my visor. "Merc, snap out." I blinked hard, then flicked the toggle on my shoulder for a burst of ordinary light, a 2-second white flash from the barrel lamp. The ridge was empty. No tall shapes, no shimmers, no wrong-limbed silhouettes. Only rock and dust. When I turned the light off and looked again through NV, the ridge was crowded. They were standing closer now. Chapter 2, Things the Goggles Should Not Show. We moved toward Black 7 in a wedge, weapons low, boots soft. The only sounds were our breath and the whisper of fabric. The goggles turned our world into a ghost film, and in that green haze the outpost looked like a dead animal. Walls bent inward, antennae snapped, snow-like dust piled in drifts. The first corpse we found wasn't a corpse at first. It was a pile of gear, armor plates, a helmet on its side, a rifle half buried. Then I saw the hand. It was still in a glove, fingers curled as if holding something that had been yanked away. Private Danner made a small noise, half gasp, half whimper. I grabbed his collar and pulled him back before he could step closer. "Don't," I hissed. "Sergeant," he whispered, "where's the rest of him?" I swept my thermal scanner across the area. It painted the world in gradients: cold ground, colder metal, faint warm patches where batteries still held charge. And then just beyond the gear, a smear of heat, fresh, human. "Medic," I said without raising my voice. Corporal Lyon, our combat medic, knelt by the smear, hands moving with the practiced certainty of someone who has seen too much. She brushed dust away. A face stared up at us. The eyes were open, reflecting the NV glow. The mouth was frozen mid-syllable, like he'd been about to call out. The body ended at the shoulders. No blood pool, no torn cloth, no dragged trail. It was as if the rest of him had been edited out. Lyon swallowed. "He's been separated." "That's one way to put it," said Specialist Carden, our comms tech, voice tight. "Like a file cut at the wrong place." I didn't like the metaphor. It made it sound clean. From inside the outpost something clattered, a loose panel tapping in the wind, or a footstep, or a rifle being dragged. Lieutenant Chin signaled, and we flowed forward through the broken hatch. The interior was colder than outside, because the walls trapped the night and let it deepen. Our goggles amplified what little starlight seeped in, but the corners remained thick with green shadow. The command room had been stripped, consoles ripped open, cables hanging like dried veins. The central table was overturned. On the far wall, someone had written with grease pencil, "They show up when you look. They hate light. Light makes THEM elsewhere. Elsewhere still touches you." Under that, in smaller letters, "Don't trust what your eyes love." We found the second body in the barracks. He lay on the bunk, blanket pulled over him like he'd tried to sleep through the war. His chest rose and fell. Alive. Lion rushed forward, and I grabbed her arm. Check thermal first, I said. She did. The figure under the blanket was warm, human-shaped. She approached, carefully like you approach a wounded animal. Hey, she whispered. Hey, soldier, can you hear me? The figure didn't respond. Lion reached for the blanket. The moment her fingers touched fabric, the shape under it twitched, not like a man waking, like something reacting to being noticed. My envy flickered. For a fraction of a second, the green world tore open into a different spectrum, deep black and sharp white, and in that instant I saw something sitting on the bunk beside the blanket. Something crouched. Something thin and wrong, its limbs folded like broken umbrellas, its head turned toward me though it had no face. Then the goggles corrected, and it was gone. Lion yanked the blanket away. There was no soldier, there was no body. Only folded cloth, empty mattress, and a long, deep impression in the foam as if something heavy had been sitting there for hours. Danner stumbled back, nearly tripping over a footlocker. What the hell? A sound cut him off. Not a scream. A kind of tearing. Like wet cloth ripping slowly, thoughtfully, as if the universe were opening a seam. We turned toward the source, rifles sweeping. Private Havel, our point man, stood in the doorway, frozen. His NV visor was down. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. A line appeared across his chest, glowing faintly in thermal, heat spilling from inside to outside. Then his front half slid away from his back half. He didn't explode, he didn't burst. It was neat, horribly neat, like a surgeon's cut made by a hand that didn't care about suffering. His halves collapsed separately, armor clattering. And in the doorway, on my goggles, something tall and thin leaned in as if curious. I fired. The round stitched the space where the thing's torso should have been. The bullets hit nothing visible, but my thermal spiked, something reacted. The air shimmered. The thing moved not by stepping but by shifting. It was suddenly closer, filling the doorway, its head tilted. Lieutenant Chin shouted, "White light." Carden fumbled a flare and cracked it. Brilliant white erupted, flooding the barracks. The green world died. My NV overloaded, then shut down, forcing my eyes to adjust. In the flare's harsh glow, there was nothing in the doorway. Nothing except Havel's two halves on the floor, and my own squad pointing rifles at empty air. But the tearing sound didn't stop. It moved behind us. Chapter 3, Doctrine of the Black. You learn quickly on a planet that punishes learning. We lost 3 people in the first 6 minutes after that flare. Not because the flare summoned anything. Not because it attracted a beast like a bug to a lamp. We lost them because the flare stole our sight. It made the monsters disappear from our view, and our brains, stupid, greedy, desperate, took that as relief. Empty doorway, empty corner, empty ceiling. Safe. Except safety is just ignorance with good posture. In the flare light, Danner turned his head to check on Havel's body. Something invisible struck him from the side. He jerked, like a puppet pulled by a string. He tried to shout, but the sound came out as a gurgle. His rifle fell. His hands clutched his own throat. There was no blade, no claw, no visible contact. Just pressure slicing, the world making room for something else. I grabbed him, dragged him back toward the center of the room, away from the corners where shadow clung even in the flare's brightness. His blood was hot on my gloves. Lion screamed his name and pressed her hands to his neck. She couldn't find the wound because the wound wasn't a hole, it was a subtraction. His voice tried to come out again, failed, and then there was only the wet flutter of breath through a space that shouldn't exist. He died staring at the flare, as if begging the light to fix him. It didn't. Lieutenant Chin killed the flare. Darkness rushed back like a tide, swallowing the room. NV screens sputtered, then stabilized. The monsters returned, dozens of them, crowding the corners, clinging to the ceiling like pale insects in green haze. And now we knew the rule. The goggles showed them, but the light made them vanish from view. Vanishing didn't mean gone. It meant somewhere our eyes couldn't follow, somewhere the bullets we fired could not convince, somewhere that still had fingers. We retreated to the outpost's comms room, the only space with thick walls and minimal openings. We sealed the door with a weld patch, turned off every indicator LED, every unnecessary glow, even the little status lights on our rifles taped over. We sat in a circle in total darkness, NV off, thermal only, small wrist screens we kept turned away from our faces so the glow wouldn't leak. We listened. Outside in the corridor, the tearing sound moved slowly, testing the door, scraping at the weld like a cat at a locked closet. Carden whispered, "This is impossible." Lion answered, "So is war." Lieutenant Chin pulled out the courier packet and read the doctrine aloud, as if it were scripture. Night vision use restricted to short scans only, thermal priority, noise discipline, do not pursue visual confirmation. She looked at us, they knew. I swallowed the taste of bile, who s? Chin's eyes were dark hollows above her respirator, the people who sent us. Carden's hands trembled as he adjusted the comm unit. I can't raise orbit, the relay's dead. Black 7's antenna was ripped like it was paper. From the corridor came a soft, wet click. Not the tearing. A click like a tongue against teeth. Then a voice muffled through the door. Help. It sounded like Havel. But Havel was in two pieces. Lion flinched, no. The voice continued, patient. Please, open, it hurts. It was Danner now, his tone, his teenage panic. My skin crawled. Lieutenant Chin leaned close to the door, rifle raised, and whispered, "Identify yourself." Code phrase. Silence. Then gently, "Sunrise." None of us had used the word since landing. It felt obscene. Chin's finger tightened on her trigger. "You're not one of ours." The door shivered as if something leaned against it with its full weight. The weld patch creaked. In thermal through the door I saw a smear of cold, colder than the metal itself, like a moving absence. It pressed itself to the seam. And then, for the first time, I understood what the monsters were not. They were not animals, they were not soldiers, they were not invaders. They were a kind of physics that had learned a trick. They were a rule that could speak. Chapter 4: How to Fight What You Cannot See. For 2 days we held that room. We rationed oxygen. We sipped water warmed by our own hands. We ate nutrient paste with our gloves on because the air was too cold to expose skin. We slept in shifts, leaning against the wall with rifles in our laps, NV off, ears wide open. Outside, the monsters paced. When we tried to use the outpost's camera feeds, the screens filled with static, and then in the static, shapes, thin, tall, featureless. Carden said, "They're in the signal." When we used NV, the shapes crowded closer. When we turned on a tiny light, the shapes vanished from the screen, but the audio picked up soft tearing in places the video claimed were empty. We began to treat sight as a temptation. Thermal didn't show them clearly. Sometimes it showed a faint cold outline like a bruise in the air, sometimes nothing at all. But thermal showed us what mattered, ourselves. It showed the warm bodies we needed to keep alive. And sound became our map. We learned the difference between dust shifting and fabric brushing, between a rifle sling creak and the click of something imitating a rifle sling creak, between a man's breathing and the way the monsters copied breathing, too regular, too polite. We learned to throw heat. Lion had emergency warming packs, chemical heaters meant to keep IV fluids from freezing. We cracked them and tossed them down corridors like glowing bait. In thermal, the heaters became little suns. Around them the cold outlines moved, approached, curved not like predators but like curious children around a campfire. Lieutenant Chin whispered, "They're drawn to gradients, to differences, to boundaries." "And we're all different," Carden said. On the third day, we made a run. We couldn't stay. The oxygen would run out. The monsters would get bored and find a way through. Or they would do what they had been doing at night, whisper our names through the vents until our dreams turned against us. We needed extraction. We needed to reach the mining rigs at Grid 7 and use their uplink. We prepared in silence. NV visors taped up, not because we wouldn't use them, but because we couldn't risk the reflex of flipping them down and feeding the night our attention. We used thermal goggles instead, grainy, slow refresh, but they showed heat in bands. And we carried no white lights. None. We left the comms room at what passed for dawn on Nox 47, the same black hour as every other hour, but with slightly less frost on the metal. In the corridor the air was still. The outpost's dead systems hummed faintly, a dying vibration like a throat clearing. We moved single file. Ahead, Chin held a sensor puck, an acoustic mapper that pinged the hallway and listened for echoes. It drew a ghostly outline of walls on her wrist screen. Behind her, I kept my hand on Lion's shoulder, so she wouldn't drift into an open doorway. We were halfway to the hatch when the tearing sound returned. Not close, far, somewhere deeper in the outpost. It moved fast, like a zipper being pulled. Then it stopped. Silence. And in that silence we heard something worse, our own bodies. The soft rasp of fabric, the tiny crackle of frost under boot soles, the wet, human warmth in our throats. I realized then that the monsters didn't need eyes. They needed information. They needed us to tell them where we were. Carden whispered into my ear, "They're learning our noise." I almost laughed. It would have been hysteria. We reached the hatch. Outside the world was open black, stars above, dust underfoot. The mining rigs far in the distance, their heat signatures like distant campfires. We stepped out. And the night vision in my helmet, despite the tape, despite my discipline, flickered on by itself. Just a blink. In that blink, the world turned green, and the field between the outpost and the rigs was filled with tall, thin shapes standing perfectly still, spaced like fence posts. A whole army of them. When the NV shut off again, the field was empty. We ran anyway. Chapter 5: The Other Army. War on Nox 47 wasn't fought in trenches you could see. It was fought in radio shadows, in hacked relays, in mines under black mountains where men shot at muzzle flashes and hoped their bullets hit something with blood. We called the enemy the Combine, because that's what the briefing called them, and names are easier than faces. As we ran across the open regolith, I saw their first sign, a thin line of heat on thermal, moving low to the ground. Not a monster, a human crawling. Lieutenant Chin raised her fist and we dropped, bodies pressed to cold dust. The crawler stopped, lifted its head. A thermal-hot face, eyes wide, staring right at us. Then the face lifted a hand and made a gesture, 2 fingers to the temple, then out. A signal, "I see you." Chin hesitated. The enemy soldier's thermal signature pulsed. He was breathing hard, scared, like us. Behind him, farther up the field, more heat signatures flickered. A squad spread out, rifles pointed. They'd seen us. In the old war, that would have meant firefight, bullets, blood. On Nox 47, it meant something else. Because when the Combine squad raised their rifles, I saw a flare of green in my peripheral. One of them had NV down. And in that moment, the tearing sound erupted between us, loud as a sail ripping in a storm. 2 Combine soldiers jerked, then folded to the ground as if their bones had been removed. The others froze, confused, firing into darkness. The monsters had not chosen sides. They had chosen attention. Lieutenant Chin stood and shouted, not loud but sharp, "Down, lights off, thermal only." The Combine soldiers didn't understand the words, but they understood the tone. One of them shouted back, voice cracking. Then he did something that nearly killed them all. He ignited a flare. White light burst across the field, harsh and blinding. The monsters vanished from the NV flicker in my taped visor, but I heard the tearing move closer, faster, thrilled. The Combine soldiers screamed, not because they saw monsters, but because they suddenly couldn't see anything else. In the flare light, shadows sprang behind every rock, behind every body. And in those shadows, something moved that the light could not expose. I grabbed my own flare, standard issue emergency marker, and crushed it in my fist without igniting it. I wanted to throw it, to make the monsters go away. But I remembered Danner dying under flare light, eyes begging. Light is not a weapon here, it is a blindfold. Lieutenant Chin ran toward the Combine squad, hands raised. The tearing sound followed. I followed Chin, because orders are the only thing that keeps you from lying down and letting the night take you. We reached the nearest Combine soldier, a woman with a shaved head and a chest plate marked with a blue stripe. Her rifle was up, pointed at Chin's heart, shaking. Chin stopped, spoke slowly, "We're not your enemy." The woman's eyes flicked to the outpost behind us, then to the empty field, then to the flare burning in her squadmate's hand. She swallowed. "What is that sound?" Behind her, another Combine soldier was sobbing. Chin said, "If you keep that flare burning, you'll die." The woman hesitated. Then she did the bravest thing I saw on Knox 47. She threw the flare into the dust and stamped it out. Darkness rushed back. Thermal vision returned. And in thermal, between our combined squads, faint cold smears retreated like tidewater pulling back from shore. The tearing sound faded, disappointed. The woman lowered her rifle. "Name." "Lieutenant Yara Chin," Chin said. "Earth Coalition." The woman's lips tightened. "Captain Sierra Vale, Outer Combine." For a moment the war paused. Not because we chose peace. Because something else demanded our full attention. Captain Vale looked around, voice low. "Your goggles, they show them." Chin nodded once. Vale barked an order to her squad. "NV off, tape it, thermal only, no flares." Her soldiers obeyed with the desperation of people who don't care why a rule exists, only that it keeps them breathing. Vale turned back to Chin. "We have a bunker, old ruin, warm. We can reach it before the next sweep." "Next sweep?" I asked. Vale's eyes reflected thermal glow like animal shine. "Every 12 hours the night gets busy, like a tide. We call it the Black Surge. You don't want to be outside when it comes." I looked at the stars, trying to see something in their arrangement that might explain why darkness could have tides. "You're telling me," I said, "the night moves." Vale didn't smile. "The night hunts." Chapter 6, Ruins Under the Starless Ridge. We marched together, Coalition and Combine, enemies with rifles pointed outward instead of at each other. The bunker Vale led us to wasn't a bunker. It was a doorway in a cliff face, half buried, carved with symbols that looked too precise to be human. The entrance exhaled cold air like a mouth. Inside, the ruin swallowed sound. Our boots made no echoes. The walls were smooth black stone that drank thermal heat until our sensors showed it as a perfect void. Vale's squad had set up a camp with heaters and ration packs, but the heaters were shielded, their glow hidden behind blankets. No visible light at all. In the center of the chamber, a hole descended into deeper darkness. "Mine shaft?" Lion asked. Vale shook her head. "Not ours, not yours, old." Carden crouched, scanning the symbols with his wrist camera. "These are Combine markings." "No," Vale said. "We found it a week ago. The night doesn't like going in there. Why? I asked. Vale's voice dropped. Because down there it already lives. We rested for an hour, the closest thing to peace we'd had since landing. Then the whispering started. At first it was just a faint sound in the far tunnel, like someone trying to speak through a wall, a susurrus, a wet breath. Then names. Havel, Danner, Elias. My own name, spoken softly as if by someone who missed me. I clenched my jaw until my teeth ached. Lieutenant Chin stood and moved to the entrance, thermal scanner sweeping. Outside on the slope, cold smears gathered. They didn't cross the threshold. They waited. Captain Vale joined Chin. It's like they're respecting a line. Chin stared into the black, or they're afraid of what's inside. Carden interrupted from the center of the chamber. I found something. He held up a metal plate, dusty, engraved with old language and a modern stamped translation. Authorized personnel only Project Umbra Mirror. Do not break shade protocol. Under that, a warning in smaller text. Visible light interferes with containment. My stomach tightened. Shade protocol. Vale's voice was hard. Told you, engineered night. Lion looked at the plate, then at the hole descending into the ruin. Containment for what? From below a sound rose. Not tearing. Not whispering. A low, slow hum, like a choir singing one note. And in that hum, my thermal visor glitched, showing a brief flash of something impossible. A shape like a giant ring buried in the rock, glowing faintly with heat that wasn't heat at all. Then the visor corrected. Carden's hands shook. That wasn't the scanner, that was the place. Lieutenant Chin looked down the shaft. We need to know what's below. Vale grabbed her arm. No, nobody goes down there, that's how you die. Chin's eyes were steady. We're already dying, the question is whether we die ignorant. They argued in whispers, but the truth was heavier than either army's pride. If the night was engineered, then someone built it. If containment required darkness, then light was not our ally. If the monsters hated light, but light interfered with containment, then the monsters might be the containment. Or the wardens. Or the prisoners. I couldn't stop thinking about the way the monsters appeared when we looked. About the note on the wall of Black 7, THEY show up when you look. About how NV made them crowd closer. What if the goggles weren't just showing us the monsters? What if the goggles were inviting them? That night, we called it night out of habit. We held a council between armies. We sat in the ruined chamber, heaters shielded, the shaft breathing cold. Captain Vale explained what the Combine had learned. The planet's night was maintained by an orbital shade array, massive panels in high orbit that blocked the star's weak light. The array was Combine or Coalition. It was ancient. The rigs mined a material called noctilith, used for stealth tech and energy storage. Both sides wanted it, and both sides pretended the war didn't exist. Then the monsters came. The Combine called them wraiths. The Coalition had no name yet, because naming something gives it a place in your mind, and that felt dangerous. Vale said, we tried floodlights. We thought if they hate light, we burn them away. But in the light we couldn't see them and they still took men. We tried NV all the time. They came faster, like they were following our gaze. Chin nodded slowly. So we fight in black, we use thermal and sound. Vale looked at her, and we die anyway. Carden leaned forward. Unless the array is the key, if shade protocol is containment, maybe the monsters are contained by darkness. Maybe if we break the shade, we release something worse. Lion said, or we finally let the planet see daylight and whatever's hunting us can't exist. Silence fell as all of us imagined a sunrise on a world that had never had one. In the quiet, the whispering outside the entrance grew louder. Names again. Promises. Come out, we can help, we miss you. Captain Vale whispered, they use memory. Lieutenant Chin whispered back, then we use truth. She looked at me, Merc, you're going down the shaft. My heart thudded once heavy. Vale grabbed Chin's shoulder, you can't just order. Chin's gaze didn't break, we need answers. I thought of Danner's smile, Havel's cut, the outpost's warning, the way the monsters leaned closer when the goggles saw them. I nodded. I'll go, I said. And because war makes strange alliances, Captain Vale said, I'm coming too. Chapter 7, Below the Shade. We descended on a rope, thermal visors up, NV sealed, lights off. The shaft walls were smooth black stone that didn't reflect. Our boot soles scraped faintly, but the sound fell into the dark and didn't return. Halfway down, the air warmed. Not by much, just enough that thermal painted a thin gradient, a breath of warmth rising from below like a living thing. At the bottom, our boots touched metal. A platform. A door. No handle. In the center of the door was a shallow depression shaped like a human palm. Carden's voice crackled in my ear through the low-power comm line. Do not touch anything you can't untouch. Vale muttered, too late for that. Lieutenant Chin's voice came softer. Report what you see. Don't open anything unless you're sure. I stared at the palm depression. The symbols around it looked like the ones at the entrance, but here they were etched deeper, sharper. Vale scanned with thermal. Doors warmer than the rock, something powered. My own breath sounded loud. I did something I regret and something I don't. I lifted my gloved hand toward the depression. And I stopped. Not because of fear, because the darkness in the depression felt attentive. As if the door was waiting to feel skin. Vale watched me, don't. I pulled my hand back. Instead, I raised my rifle and fired one round into the door. The shot was deafening in the shaft. The sound bounced once, twice, then died as if swallowed. The bullet made no spark, no dent. The door absorbed it. Then the hum began. Low, slow, a single note rising from the metal. Vale's thermal visor spiked, faint lines of heat forming patterns across the door like veins lighting up. And then, without any mechanical sound, the door slid sideways into the wall, revealing a chamber beyond. Black stone again, but here the darkness was different, not empty, not passive. It felt occupied. In the center of the chamber stood a ring, 10 meters across, made of the same black material as the walls, but threaded with pale lines that weren't quite light. They were absence shaped into geometry. Inside the ring, the air looked wrong, like a window to a place where depth didn't behave. Vale whispered, Umbra mirror. On the far wall, a console sat dust-covered. The interface was simple, buttons and a screen, human-made, recent. Someone had been here. I moved to the console, keeping my thermal visor on it. The screen was dark, but the buttons were warm. Vale scanned the floor, tracks fresh, boot prints. Combine, I asked. Vale shook her head, not ours. On the console, a label read. Project Umbra Mirror Control Node, Black Tide Management Authorized, Corporate Oversight. Corporate, not coalition, not combine. The war wasn't a war, it was a cover. Carden's voice whispered in my ear, Elias, do you see the ring? Yes, I said. Chin's voice came tense, what is it? I swallowed, it looks like a gate. The hum deepened. From within the ring, a sound rose that made my skin go cold. Not tearing, not whispering. A chorus. Many voices, layered, speaking in words I recognized and words I didn't. Then one voice rose above the others, clear, calm, familiar. It was Danner. Sergeant, it said gently, you can stop running, we're here. Vale cursed under her breath, don't listen. I tried not to. But the voice was my mind's favorite trick, hope. The console screen flickered to life without me touching it. It displayed a single message. Shade protocol active. Black tide in 001322. Eye-based sensors detected above threshold. Reduce observation to maintain containment. Below that in smaller text. If shade protocol FAILS, entity coherence becomes unpredictable. Cardin's voice came fast now. Eye-based sensors, that's NV cameras, anything amplifying photons. The more you look, the more. A loud crack cut him off. Not from the comm. From the chamber. Vale's thermal visor stuttered. She jerked her head up, scanning. The ring's interior shimmered. A thin shape emerged, not stepping, not crawling, just forming, as if drawn by an invisible pencil. Tall, folded, featureless. The monster was different here, clearer, sharper. It turned its blank head toward us. And then, impossibly, I felt its attention like a hand on my throat. Vale raised her rifle and fired. The round struck the shape and stopped. Not deflected, not absorbed. They hung in the air for a fraction of a second, as if stuck in invisible gel, then fell to the floor with dull clinks. The monster didn't flinch. The voice from the ring, Danner's voice, laughed softly. Bullets don't matter, it said. Only looking matters. The monster leaned closer. Vale grabbed my arm. We go now. I backed toward the door, eyes on the shape. And as I watched it, it grew. Not in size. In presence. The more I perceived it, the more defined it became, as if my attention was giving it mass. I tore my gaze away, focusing on the floor, on Vale's boots, on anything but the shape. It blurred, wavered. The hum shifted. The console beeped. Black tide in 001103. Vale pulled me through the doorway and into the shaft tunnel. The door began to slide closed behind us on its own. Before it sealed, I risked one last glance at the ring. In thermal, the chamber was warm with our bodies. In the center, the ring was a perfect cold circle. And around it, standing in the darkness, were dozens of tall, thin shapes, watching the door close like mourners watching a coffin lid. Chapter 8: The Black Tide. We climbed like men fleeing a fire, even though the fire here was cold. When we reached the ruined chamber above, the air seemed thicker. The whispering outside the entrance had become a constant murmur, like wind through dead trees. Lieutenant Chin and Cardin hauled us up. Vale's face was pale and thermal. Gate, she whispered. It's a gate. Chin's eyes sharpened. Containment system. I nodded, forcing words out. It reacts to attention. It warned about eye-based sensors. It said reduce observation. Cardin's hands shook. That's insane. No, Chin said. That's a doctrine. She turned to both squads. No NV, no cameras, no looking for them. We move by heat and sound only. We keep our gaze low. We don't feed the dark. Captain Vale added, and we don't go outside during the black tide. Lion asked, what is the black tide? Cardin answered before anyone else could. A scheduled coherence event, like the system cycles something. The monsters align. As if the night itself had shifts. We waited. Minutes dragged, measured by the quiet beep of Cardin's timer and the slow frost forming on our armor. Then the hum from below rose through the rock, vibrating in our bones. Outside the entrance, the whispering stopped. Silence fell so absolute it felt like pressure. In that silence, I heard something moving across the slope. Not footsteps. A sliding, synchronized motion, like thousands of fingers brushing dust. Vale whispered, they're coming. Chin whispered back, don't look. Then the tearing began. Not one rip. Many. All at once across the slope outside. Like fabric being torn in 1,000 places. Our thermal visors showed cold smears piling up at the entrance, pressing against the invisible boundary like water against a dam. They didn't cross, but the air around the entrance grew colder, until our breath turned to crystals. The cold smears writhed, layered, as if the monsters were stacking themselves, trying to become something heavier. The hum from below deepened, the ring's song. I realized then what the shade array did. It didn't just keep the planet dark. It kept the monsters coherent in a predictable way, cycling their presence like tides. Containment. Not a prison with bars, a prison with rules. And like any prison, it needed maintenance. Somebody had been maintaining it. Corporate oversight. The real enemy. Carden suddenly stiffened. I'm getting a signal. Chin snapped her head toward him. From where? Carden pointed at his comm unit. Orbit, weak, but it's there like a beacon, a maintenance ping. Vale's eyes narrowed. From the shade array. Carden nodded. Yes, and it's requesting a status report, like it expects someone to answer. Chin looked at me. Can you respond? Carden hesitated. I can spoof an acknowledgement, but that means transmitting. That means attention, signals. Vale barked no more. But Chin's gaze was hard. We need to know how to end this. Carden's fingers hovered over controls. Outside, the cold smears pressed harder. The boundary trembled. I heard a voice, clear as speech, from just beyond the entrance. Not Danner, not Havel. My mother. Elias, it said, gentle, patient. Turn on the light, you're frightened. Let me see you. I hadn't heard her voice in 14 years. My throat tightened painfully. Lion's hand gripped my shoulder. Don't. The voice continued. I'm right here, just open the door, bring the light. The monsters were learning faster now, digging deeper into us. Carden whispered, they're in the signal, Sergeant. They're in everything that carries information. Chin said, then we cut the biggest information source of all. She pointed upward, toward the sky, toward orbit, toward the shade array that kept the planet blind. Break the shade, she said. Vale stared at her. Are you insane? If the shade fails and coherence becomes unpredictable. Chin cut her off. We saw what predictable looks like. Outposts cut clean, men erased, a scheduled tide of death. I'd rather gamble on chaos than live under an algorithm. Lion whispered, how do we break it? We can't reach orbit. Carden swallowed. The maintenance beacon, it might have a fail-safe, a command. If we spoof the right sequence, we could force the array to retract. Vale shook her head. That's suicide. Chin looked around at the gathered soldiers. Coalition and Combine, all of us hollow-eyed, frost-covered, listening to the tearing outside. This entire planet is suicide, she said. The only question is whether we die in darkness or in the brief moment before something like dawn. No one argued after that. Chapter 9, Light That Does Not Save. We moved at the edge of the black tide, when the boundary at the entrance was thick with cold smears, and the monsters outside were focused on pressing, not on hunting. We climbed out of the ruin and crossed the open field toward the mining rigs, guided by thermal beacons we threw ahead, warm packs that marked our path like breadcrumbs of heat. We kept our gaze low. We used no NV. We spoke only in taps and hand signals. The tearing followed us at a distance, like wolves pacing a torch line. When we reached the rigs, the metal towers rose above us like skeletal giants. Their generators were still running, automatic systems stubborn against the cold. Inside the control shack, Carden found the uplink console. His hands moved quickly, plugging cables, bypassing security. Lieutenant Chin stood behind him, rifle up, thermal visor scanning door seams for cold smears. Captain Vale and I stood at the shack's narrow window, watching the field. In thermal, we saw cold movement in the distance, shapes clustering, stretching, following. Vale whispered, "They're waiting for you to look." I whispered back, "I'm trying not to." The console chimed. Carden exhaled, "I have a handshake with the array." Chin asked, "Can you command it?" Carden's voice was thin. "Maybe, but it's old. The protocol isn't human. I'm translating the requests like listening to whales." Lion hovered near the door, medkit strapped tight. "What happens if the shade retracts?" Carden hesitated. "Starlight, weak daylight, enough visible photons to make them go away?" Vale asked. Carden looked at me, and his eyes in thermal were hot with fear. "No, enough to change the rules." The console displayed an interface, simple, archaic. Shade status deployed, containment stable, black tide cycle active, maintenance overdue. There was a button labeled emergency retraction manual. Chin didn't hesitate. "Do it." Carden's finger hovered. Outside, the tearing sound rose, as if the monsters sensed a shift. The cold shapes on thermal surged closer. Vale hissed, "Now." Carden pressed the button. The rig shack vibrated, as if something in the sky moved. For a moment, nothing changed. Then on the horizon, though horizon was a concept the night had tried to erase, a thin line of gray appeared. Not green NV, not thermal color. Actual gray, seen with my own eyes through the window. My breath caught. The sky above the gray line lightened by a fraction, as if someone had smudged charcoal with a thumb. Stars began to fade. And in that first, impossible softening of night, I felt the planet hold its breath. Lieutenant Chin whispered, "Dawn." Captain Vale whispered, "Or disaster." The cold shapes outside stopped moving. The tearing sound ceased. Silence flooded the field. In that silence, a single shape, tall, thin, rose close to the shack window, not seen with eyes, not visible in the gray light. But in thermal, I saw a cold absence where it stood. It lifted one long limb and touched the glass. The glass frosted instantly under its touch. Then in the growing gray, the cold absence flickered. For a heartbeat I thought, "It's dying. It can't handle light." Then I realized the truth. The monsters weren't disappearing. They were changing. In the gray light, their outlines became uncertain. Not because they were gone, but because they were no longer bound to the rules that made them show up in NV. They were becoming what the console warned. Unpredictable. The glass began to crack. Vale raised her rifle. "Shoot the window." Chin snapped, "No, you'll shatter our only barrier." Vale snarled, "It's already shattering." The cold limb pressed harder. A crack spidered across the pane. Carden shouted, "Array retraction is partial. It's not full daylight, just enough to destabilize coherence. The worst possible middle state. Not dark enough to keep them predictable, not bright enough to banish them." Outside, the field erupted in movement. Cold smears surged, but now they didn't move like fence posts or patient predators. They moved like smoke in wind. Like shadows unmoored. The tearing returned frantic, everywhere at once. Lion screamed as something struck the door from outside. The metal bowed inward. Chin shouted, "Fall back," to the main generator hall. We ran. The rig complex became a maze of metal corridors and machinery, all painted in faint gray by the weak light bleeding into the world. Shadows formed and shifted, confusing thermal and eye alike. In the generator hall, huge turbines hummed, warm as hearts. Heat signatures everywhere, blindingly bright on thermal, a forest of warmth that made it hard to pick out a human body among the machinery. But the warmth gave us something else. Gradients, boundaries. The monsters loved boundaries. They fed on difference. Now we would use difference as a weapon. Vale grabbed a coolant hose and yanked it open. A spray of freezing vapor erupted, turning the air into a fog of cold. Against that cold fog, any warm body would stand out. Any cold absence would stand out too. Chin shouted, "Spread, pair up. Don't look at them, mark them by contrast." We moved between turbines, using the fog as a screen. The tearing came close, so close I felt vibration in my teeth. A shadow moved through the fog, not visible, but the fog itself bent around it, curling like smoke around a knife. Vale fired, not at the shadow but through it, raking the space. The bullets sparked off turbine housing, metal shrieking. The shadow flinched, not from bullets but from attention, from being traced by our action. It recoiled, and the fog closed behind it. I realized then, it wasn't bullets that mattered. It was forcing them into definition, forcing them to choose a shape. We began a fight the only way we could, by denying them stable observation, by flooding the space with too much information for any one gaze to feed. Carden rigged the hall's emergency sirens to pulse in random patterns, sound bursts that mapped the room for us and scrambled their mimicry. Lion cracked heat packs and threw them, creating false targets in thermal, drawing cold absences away from us. Chin ordered us to keep our eyes on our wrist screens and the fog, not on the empty spaces our brains wanted to fill with fear. Still, men died. One Combine soldier screamed as a cold absence brushed him. His thermal signature split, then winked out like a candle pinched. One of ours, Specialist Rook, ran for the door, panicked, and in the gray half-light his shadow stretched behind him. The shadow detached from his feet and rose, tall and thin, and then there was tearing and the sound stopped abruptly. I will never forget that, not the death, the fact that his own shadow stood up. In the chaos, Captain Vale grabbed my collar and pulled me behind a turbine. Her eyes were wild. "This is worse," she hissed. "You broke the rules and the night is free." Lieutenant Chin's voice rang over the sirens. "Carden, can you finish retraction? Full light." Carden shouted back, "No, the array is damaged. It's retracting unevenly, some panels stuck." Chin's face tightened. "Then we make our own light." Vale stared. "With what?" Chin pointed at the turbines. "The generators, overload them, white arc, full spectrum." Lion shouted, "That will cook us." Chin shouted back, "Then we die in a flash instead of a whisper." Captain Vale grabbed Chin's arm. "If light erases them from sight, how will you know it worked?" Chin's eyes were hard, wet. "We won't, that's the price." Chapter 10, The Flash Before Silence. They say there are only a few honest moments in a soldier's life. One is the second before you pull a trigger. Another is the second before you choose to die. Lieutenant Chin chose. She ordered us into the maintenance tunnel beneath the generator hall, narrow, cramped, lined with coolant pipes that hummed with cold. She ordered Carden to rig an overload. I helped, hands moving as if in a drill, even though my mind screamed. We ran cables, we bypassed safeties, we turned a controlled power plant into a bomb. Above us the tearing raged. Sometimes the tunnel shook as something heavy slammed into turbine housings. Sometimes a voice whispered down the vents, pleading, promising, sounding like everyone we'd lost. "Elias," my mother whispered again, "come into the light." I bit my tongue until I tasted blood, real blood, grounded, human. Carden's hands shook as he armed the overload sequence. "If I do this," he said, voice breaking, "we might blind ourselves permanently." "Better blind than dead," Vale said, though her tone held no confidence. Lieutenant Chin looked at me. "Sergeant Merrick, if we survive, you tell the truth." I laughed once sharp. "Who'll listen?" She didn't answer. Carden initiated the overload. The tunnel lights, tiny status LEDs we'd taped over, suddenly brightened under the tape, glowing like embers. The air warmed fast, metal creaked. Above, the tearing sound peaked into a kind of ecstatic frenzy. Then the world turned white. Not bright white. A full-spectrum arc flash. born from generators tearing themselves apart, flooding the rig complex with light so intense it pierced eyelids and turned bones translucent. For a fraction of a second, I saw the monsters without any goggles. Not as green silhouettes, not as cold absences. I saw them as shadows cast by nothing, as holes in reality shaped like hunger. They filled the generator hall, hundreds, thousands, layered, writhing, reaching. And in that white instant, all their blank heads turned toward the same point. The ring below the ruin, the umbra mirror. As if the flash had illuminated a path back to their source. Then the light collapsed into darkness again, because the generators died and the shade array still covered the sky. The afterimage burned in my eyes, a negative imprint of tall shapes. Silence fell. No tearing, no whispering. Only the distant crackle of cooling metal. I lay on the tunnel floor, blind, ears ringing. Someone coughed. Vale's voice hoarse. "Elias, you alive?" I blinked, vision slowly returning as gray ghosts. "I'm here," I rasped. Carden was sobbing softly. It had stopped. Lieutenant Chin whispered, "Did we win?" No one answered, because none of us knew what win meant. We climbed out of the tunnel, moving slowly, eyes watering. The generator hall was wrecked, turbines split, panels blown, metal twisted. But the air felt different. Lighter. Not warmer, not brighter. Less watched. We stepped outside. The sky was still dim gray near the horizon, but the starfield was mostly gone. The shade array must have shifted enough to let the planet's distant sun paint the edge of the world with weak daylight. In that weak daylight, the field was empty. No tall shapes visible, no cold smears on thermal. Just dust, ruins, dead machinery. I wanted to believe it was over. Then I saw my own shadow on the ground, cast by the thin gray light. It stretched behind me, long and sharp. And it moved a fraction of a second after I moved. Like it was thinking first. Captain Vale saw it too, her face drained of color. "Elias," she whispered, "don't look at it." But it was too late. Because the shadow already knew I was there. Chapter 11, The Last Order. We regrouped with what was left of both squads. 15 soldiers out of 37. Lieutenant Chin had burns on her hands. Carden's hair was singed. Lion's med kit was empty. Vale's rifle was bent at the barrel from striking metal. We radioed orbit again and again. No response. Either the shade array's shift had cut communications, or corporate oversight had decided we were expendable. We made camp inside the rig complex, choosing a room with thick walls and minimal openings. We sealed it. We taped over every glow. We sat in darkness again, because even with gray daylight outside, darkness still existed here, in corners, under tables, in the space beneath your own chin. And where darkness exists, the monsters can exist. We listened. Hours passed. No tearing. No whispering. Hope crept in like a disease. Then the tapping started. Soft, rhythmic, from the ceiling panel above us. Tab, tab, tab. Not like metal cooling. Like a finger. Vale whispered no. Carden's thermal scanner showed nothing. The tapping moved along the ceiling, tracing a circle. Then from the vent, a voice whispered, calm as a friend. "You made the light," it said. "Thank you." Lieutenant Chin stood slowly, rifle raised, eyes narrowed in the dark. "Who are you?" she demanded. The voice replied, "We were stuck in your kind of seeing, in your devices, in your attention." Tab, tab, tab. "You broke the rules," it said, almost approving. "You opened the spectrum. Now we can live in the shadows you carry." Lion's hand shook. "Are you the Wraiths?" The voice chuckled softly. "Name's cute." Vale snarled, "What do you want?" A pause, as if the darkness considered. "We want what all hunters want," it said, "to keep hunting." The ceiling panel flexed downward, bulging as if something pressed from above. Lieutenant Chin's voice went quiet, deadly. "We can do it again." Another flash. The voice whispered, "You can't flash forever, and you can't remove shadows from your own body." The panel creaked, then popped open. Dust fell. Something cold dropped into the room with a soft thud, no heavier than a blanket. Thermal showed a faint cold smear on the floor, spreading like ink. No NV, no visible form. Only absence, and the memory of tall shapes burned into our eyes. Lieutenant Chin made the last order I heard her give. "Lights out," she said. "All of them, even the ones in your head." She raised her rifle and fired, not at the smear, but at the ceiling, shattering the only weak gray light seeping in from a crack. Darkness sealed us in. And in the darkness, the sound of tearing began again, close, intimate, like someone unwrapping a gift. I crawled, I didn't think. I followed heat, my own, veils, lions, staying close to bodies because bodies were anchors, proof that reality still had rules. The monsters didn't need to be seen anymore. They moved in the shadows between our breaths. I heard someone scream, cut off. I heard a rifle clatter. I heard a wet rip that could have been cloth or something softer. I didn't look, I didn't dare. I reached the back wall, found the maintenance hatch by touch, pulled it open, and shoved myself into a narrow crawl space. Behind me, the tearing continued. A voice whispered from the dark, gentle as a lullaby. "Elias," it said, "you're doing so well, you're not looking, you're learning." I crawled until my muscles burned, and my lungs felt like they were filled with dust. Finally, I found a shaft that led up, toward the rig's exterior service ladder. I climbed. When I emerged, the sky had lightened more. A thin, weak day crawled over the horizon, turning the regolith gray and the metal towers pale. For the first time since landing, I could see my own hands without sensors. I stood alone in that gray light, listening. No tearing, no whispering. Just wind, real wind, moving across the cold dust. I thought maybe they stayed inside, maybe they're gone. Then my shadow stretched on the ground and rose slightly at the edge, like a wave lifting. It didn't stand fully. It didn't show a face. It just leaned, watching, waiting for my eyes to love it. Epilogue: what you should do. I don't know how long I wandered. Time on Nox 47 was a lie. The shade array made days meaningless. The gray light never became warm, never became bright. It just hovered, uncertain, like the universe regretted letting us see. I found a cargo pod near the rigs, an emergency escape capsule meant to launch survivors to a rendezvous orbit. It still had power. I sealed myself inside, strapped in, and launched blind, because I was more afraid of staying than of dying in vacuum. The capsule's systems recorded everything: my breathing, my whispers, the way my heart hammered whenever my eyes drifted to the corner where shadows pooled. At some point after launch, the pod entered a calm corridor and began broadcasting automatically. That's why you're hearing me. Maybe you're in a warm room under a bright lamp. Maybe you're driving at night with the dashboard glow painting your hands. Maybe you're listening in bed, eyes half closed, letting my words create pictures in your mind. Here's what I need you to understand. The monsters on Nox 47 were not just creatures. They were a relationship between darkness and attention, between what you can't see and what you insist is there. Night vision showed them because it stretched your sight into the places the shade array guarded. White light made them vanish from view because it pushed your eyes back into comfortable lies, but neither stopped them. Because the real habitat of the wraiths is not the planet. It's the shadow you cast when you exist. Corporate oversight wanted Noctilith. Both armies were bait. The shade array was a lid on a box that should have stayed sealed. We broke it. We made our own light. And for a moment in that white flash, I saw the truth. Every monster turned toward its origin, toward the Umbra mirror, as if the light had shown them the way out. If they escaped Nox 47, they didn't need a ship. They needed a signal. They needed a story. They needed you to carry them in your mind the way I carry them in mine. So here's my final order, recorded for anyone who thinks curiosity is harmless. When you finish this recording, do not sit in the dark and replay it. Do not rewind and check if you heard something behind my voice. Do not turn off your lamp to see if the corners move. Leave the light on if it comforts you, but don't trust it, and more importantly, don't look for monsters. Because if you look hard enough, the universe will always give you something to be afraid of. And on some worlds, fear is not a feeling. It's a door.